Today I'm going to walk you guys through the A to Z, everything you need to know about how to operate a water-fed pole and make sure you get those windows nice and sparkling clean. When you first arrive to the location, you're going to want to introduce yourself to the customer, let them know that you're about to clean the windows. If they're a first-time customer, you're going to want to make sure you explain to them that you're going to be using a water-fed pole. It's a brush on an extension pole with filtered water, and let them know that there will be water drops that will be on the glass, but they will dry spot free, and you're going to make sure that there's no spots left behind. This helps to kind of diffuse any objections or questions they might have and kind of prevent them from, if you don't let them know in advance and they see spots or drops of water on the glass, they're going to think that it's not clean yet. They're going to think it's just as if they had sprayed a hose against their glass and it's going to leave spots or hard water stains once you leave. So if you let them know in advance, it kind of helps diffuse that whole situation so that they're not going to come out while you're still cleaning the windows and be like, hey, there's still spots on those windows over there. It'll happen if you're not proactive and let them know in advance to warn them. If you have two people on one truck, then one person can already start unloading the equipment and getting things ready to go, hooking up the water supply, while the other person is talking to the customer and helping them know what to expect. After this has happened, do a quick walk around and make sure if there's anything that the water-fed pole won't work for, you know in advance. Take out the screens and prep everything. If there's rugs in the back or on the front patio, move those out of the way so they're not going to be getting wet. If there's furniture that needs to be scooted out of the way, go ahead and take care of that first too. And just prep everything so that once you have the pole set up, it's going to be smooth sailing. First, you got to know the basics of how the filter setup works. Now, I have a 3-stage filter, RODI system. First, you have a carbon sediment filter, and that takes out the larger debris, and that runs directly up until the top of the RO membrane. The RO membrane is in the stainless steel casing here, and it runs down, and then at the bottom we have an outlet with a valve on it. Now this valve, you only need to close that valve if you're ever going to rinse it out. You go from here, comes around. I added my own kink resistant hose, and it enters in at the bottom on the other side of this DI tank. Now the DI tank here is where the DI resin is. So the water should come out of the RO membrane at about 20 parts per million and then go filter the rest through the DI tank with the DI resin, and it comes out the hose spigot right down at the bottom here. So you can see I've removed the wheels here. They actually broke off, but I never take my unit out of my truck. I leave it in there all the time. As far as the water goes, instead of taking it out and carting it to a location, I simply have a quick connect in the inlet, and I just hook up a hose directly, like so. So I always just have enough extra hose so that wherever I am, I'll run that hose as far as I need to. I'm primarily working in residential neighborhoods. I'm not doing a lot of commercial work, and so because of that, 75 feet with this little 0G hose. It's a 3/4 inch inner diameter. You only need 5/8. With that hose, I'm able to reach any spigot, any location I go, just in case I have an extra 50 feet or so, just in case. But like I said, I never need it. I just run that 75-foot hose to the nearest spigot, and then I run the longer hose from the unit, this yellow hose here. It comes, now it's a little dirty now, but it comes with most of the setups. At least if you buy it through Window Cleaning Resource, you get a little 50-foot section that goes until you have a quick connect, and that's where you hook up the rest of your hose. Just a reminder, with the hoses that connect these tanks together, you want to make sure before you start a job that it's not kinked. If you kinked, that will severely lower your pressure and flow coming of the water. So I always check this outlet here, make sure there's no leaks, and make sure that it's not kinked so that the water can flow freely to the windows. So I'm just gonna go ahead and run this hose to the nearest spigot, connect it, and get some water flowing. Make sure you fix any kinks in your supply hose. Every kink is going to ruin your flow rate, which is kind of the most important element of having good pressure. So you can see it's flowing. There's a little bit of a leak. I don't worry about that very much, but if you did care about it, you can just tighten those connections a little bit. And now you can see I have this one hose hanging off. This is the water that comes out of the RO filter. This is the dirty water. You don't want to recycle this water into your tank or anything if you have a, maybe if you're operating with a pump. This is filthy, filthy water. That's going to be heavily concentrated with debris or with chemicals inside of it. That's the water that's being filtered out. So I know some people in the past worked out a jig where they have a carrying tank for their water or a holding tank, and they'll just use a pump and they'll recycle this water into that tank. But that's just going to make your filters have to work double duty with any of the water that comes out of there. So I definitely don't advise that. Just have enough extra hose that you can hang it over the side. Every once in a while, customers or passersby stop me and say, "Oh, hey, did you realize your hose is leaking?" And it's supposed to. So don't worry about that. Now I can go to the end of this initial hose, and there's a little quick connect on there. And there's a couple different diameters, but just make sure you have the right connections so that everything works. And I just simply push the hose into there. Now, hose management can be done a number of different ways. The way I have it is I plug into that quick connect, and then I have a reel, an electric reel. This one's from Lowe's. They sell an orange one at Home Depot. But these I've found to be very efficient. I can hold 200 feet of the 3/16 inch hose, inner diameter. This is the Xero hose. It's very kink resistant, works very well. I have 200 feet on one spool. I've done two spools with 100 plus feet each. I found it's just easier to have one. I only need 100 feet. So in the middle of this 200-foot section, I have a quick connect. So it's actually two 100-foot sections connected together in the middle. So I'm just going to run this out. Now that we've run the hose as far as we needed to go, we've got our pick of brushes here. This is one of the original brushes that they used to sell. I think it's a Tucker, but it's all artificial. It's very soft. I don't really use this unless it's like been cleaned in the last month. This is a 18-inch hybrid Tucker brush. I only use that for large panes when I have a good water flow. And I've got the Tucker Alpha scrubber with the full bores here. Actually, this isn't Tucker, this is the Xero with the Tucker components added to it. Tucker rinse bar, that's my go-to if it's a first time clean or if it hasn't been cleaned in a year. But today I'm going to be using the hybrid Tucker with just two pencil jets. So we're just going to go to the end of where the hose goes, hook up to our pole, and start cleaning glass. So we got good water flow here. Like I said before, we're not going to need all 200 feet. So I can just take this spool back to the truck and set it aside. Otherwise, just make sure you don't forget it. You never want to leave a reel behind. Those things, they're not too expensive, but you don't want to have to pay for things you don't got to pay for. When it comes to water fed poles, there's two ways you can connect your hose. You can run it through the bottom all the way up to the top and come out there, and then you plug in, or you just go straight into the connection. And this is typically the way that I have my hoses. Now I run my hose outside of the pole because that way I can just take the top of the brush right out of the top plug and I can move it around and scrub things that are floor level by hand without using the pole. Sometimes you get into a tight spot and the pole can just be a little bit cumbersome, so it's nice to have the freedom just to detach it and not be tethered onto the pole with the hose running through it. So some people, sometimes in the past, I'll have the whole hose going through the pole. So it's really a personal preference thing. It can vary from job to job. I switch back and forth depending on my mood. That's really up to the user, how they want to use their pole and how they want to run their hose. Now, I gotta give you guys a pretty important tip here. Never, ever, ever, I repeat, never lay a water-fed pole on the ground. It's dangerous, these are expensive, they're made out of carbon fiber and they're pretty durable, but they can break, they can get little fractures into the fibers between them and crack and ultimately lose their strength and rigidity and even break in half. So make sure you take it to a safe place and lean it carefully. You don't walk away from it unless it's securely leaned in a place where nobody's going to step on it and that's out of the way. You want to protect these with your life. You know, the cheapest ones are $400, but these things can become pretty pricey the longer and the more rigid they become. So be careful with these. Guard it with your life. You want to hold at a comfortable position with your hands about hips width apart. It doesn't matter which hand is on top. Just do whatever is more comfortable and scrub away. Now, when you get into tight places like this, always be careful to hold as close to the base of the pole as you can. The more you have hanging out, the more likely you are to bump into things and cause destruction. If you're holding on the very end of it, you're not going to accidentally bump things as often. So carefully hold near the bottom of the pole in tight situations, and you don't want to get more than 1 or 2 feet extra slack on the bottom edge of your hand. It's just going to become more dangerous and you bump into things. One more thing, guys, these water-fed poles are actually conductive. If you hold these and touch a power line, you literally can die. So watch out for anything that's connecting to the house that could potentially be carrying electricity. Your life is at risk here. Anytime you're cleaning windows with a water-fed pole, you have to be mindful that the water is going to be dripping downward. You got gravity working in that direction. So you always want to start at the top and allow the water that's up there to finish dripping and at least get mostly dry before you bother cleaning the glass beneath. You can always scrub it and get it ready, but you're going to need to rinse it once the top is completely done dripping. So I'm going to go ahead, extend this up, and different clamps on different poles work different ways. If you're starting to have rotation and it's spinning around and the pole begins to spin, you're just going to want to make sure these ones you can just manually tighten them. Sometimes you have to use an Allen wrench or something, but you got to check these little clamps. You got to make sure they're in good condition and adjust them as needed. If you're having a hard time extending the pole, then the clamp is probably too tight. But if your pole is spinning around like so, then it's too loose. So I just don't have to monitor it every time, but just as you're working and you start feeling it slip, go ahead and find which one's doing that. You can simply collapse it all the way and then see if you tug it and turn it around. You look at the section that's moving the most. Right now, this one is staying still. So that means this one needs to be tightened just a hair. And it's just a very small movement. And that's going to make it so you have to use a lot of pressure to twist it. And that's what we want. You don't want it to be spinning around on you. That's how you can damage glass, especially if you have any type of a rinse bar. And all the more so if your rinse bar happens to be made out of metal. They don't make a lot of the rinse bars. They don't make a lot of the rinse bars out of metal anymore. But like the one that I have on my other pole is made by Tucker, and it's plastic, so it's more forgiving. You can scuff up the glass still, but it's not as big of a terrible thing. If you have an aluminum rinse bar, then be very, very careful because that aluminum can and will scratch the glass if you're not careful. So now that we have the extension pole extended as much as we need, I'm going to start with the frames first. You want to give them a good scrub. Make sure all of the debris, all the dust, all the pollen, whatever could be on there, you want to knock it loose and then start giving it a good rinse. Now you need that to stop dripping before you give a final rinse to the glass. So you want to make sure you get the frame nice and clean very first. Now it's going to have time to drip and dry while I do the scrubbing. And the amount of scrubbing that you need depends on the brush that you have and the dirtiness of the glass. In this case, these windows are well maintained. I've cleaned them within the past 3 months or so, and so I can use the hybrid brush and only do about 2 to 3 brushes across the glass. Now, if the windows haven't been cleaned in 6 months, then you might consider using a boar's hair brush. If you've got the hybrid, you probably will need to do about 4 swipes up and down over each square inch. But if you have the boar's hair, you could probably do about 2 or 3. If it's been a year since the glass is cleaned, you're gonna have to add about 2 swipes per brush. So you're going about 5 or 6 swipes with the boar's hair. And then anywhere from 6 to 8, depending on how bad the glass is, with one of these hybrid brushes. So now I'm going to allow the glass up there to keep dripping. In the meantime, I can go down to this next section and I'm going to scrub it and just prepare it for its rinse. So I'm always working in a general pattern, starting with the outside of the window towards the inside, frame first, followed by the glass, and I'm working in sections from top to bottom. So now I'm working in the shade, and that means it's going to take a little bit longer for the glass to be ready to be rinsed. I'm going to make sure I get these frames nice and clean. I'm going to give that top pane a little bit more time to dry before I rinse it off. Now in the meantime, I can come over here and get started on these windows while that window on the other side is still drying. Just gonna scrub the top pane and the top frame, give it a little bit of rinse. And I want to be careful not to splash the water above the glass very much, because the side of the house, as you might be able to see, can be very dirty. And if I get that wet, that water is going to drip down and bring all the dirt and dust with it. Now I can go ahead and scrub these frames and this glass, but I'm not going to rinse this until the top has finished drying. Now you can see up there how the top edge is mostly dry and it's darker where it's wet. So I'm going to go up and be very careful not to splash the water onto the frame again. I go around just beneath the dried out section. And I'm just going to work my way down a few inches at a time. And the guideline is the pattern of the water. However far it goes down, I could technically go from that section down about 6 to 8 inches. Now where it's getting a little more hydrophobic, I'm going to have to make smaller drops, just a couple inches at a time. So I'm looking at how far the water cascades, and wherever it starts beating up, there's a good chance that you could get spotting, little white spots when the water dries, where the debris didn't get rinsed all the way down off of the glass. It can bead up and get stuck on the glass, so you just have to be a little more careful with rinsing when the water beads up like that. That's called hydrophobic glass. Hydrophobic glass. Hydrophobic glass doesn't like the water and doesn't let it cascade, and so you have to be extra careful with those rinses. So now I'm just going to go ahead and get the top edge of this glass, and I'm going to let that finish dripping. I'll come back to this after I go back to the other windows and rinse those. So back over here, I'm going to do the same thing. Just going to stay under the line where it's dry and rinse down a few inches at a time. Now sometimes it can take a little while to get the hang of it. You want to be able to move quickly, so you're not going to be spending twice as long with a water-fed pole as you would with the normal, traditional squeegee. But if you move too fast, you're going to get spots on the glass, and you're going to have to go back and rinse it again. So you want to avoid that. You'll find your kind of happy medium with each house. The key is just to go back every time a section dries. You're gonna just want to walk back before you finish and double check, make sure there's no spotting from dirty water on the glass, and make sure it's coming out clean. Sometimes you're gonna have to hit it, especially if they haven't been cleaned in recent times. You might have to hit it with some steel wool if there's some hard water stains that are building up, or if there's heavier debris, artillery fungus, pollen can get on there, all kinds of things that sometimes the brush doesn't quite get it all. Now you can get with a boar's hair brush, you can get most everything. You can always use a scrub pad. There's a few ways you can address it, but in general, if they're well-maintained windows, you should be good to go. You might just have to do an extra rinse if the water's not quite getting everything down. So I'm just working my way down again. When it comes to rinsing, a lot of times I like to go across the top edge, then down the side edge, just like you're cutting in with a squeegee. And then I'll rinse side to side, working my way down. And that's going to most times get all the debris off of the glass. Same thing, cut across the top, go down the side, and the other side, and then across left to right going down. And the dirtier the windows were, the more careful you need to be about the rinse. But if the windows are in good shape already, you don't have as much to worry about. Just always go back and double check everything. You want to find the flaws before the homeowner does, because they do happen. Every once in a while, your tank will run out of resin, or the resin will expire. As far as the general workflow goes, I'm going to start and run the hose out as far as I need to. Obviously you start out in the front where your tank is, and you run the hose around the side and to the back. And if you can reach to the far back corner, that's usually good enough. Sometimes if there's going to be a fence that you can't have maybe the gate's locked or there is no gate, then I'll go ahead and go down the other side as well. You're just going to have to make sure you have enough hose for that. Smaller lots, smaller homes, it's not a big problem. If you get into something that's, say, like a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot plus home, and they have a large lot size, and you're gonna have to go a long way, then depending on the amount of hose you have, you're just gonna have to pick a corner and then come back around and start at that same corner, working in the opposite direction. In general, the strategy is get that top one first, then start doing this lower level of glass, and then finish off with the bottom windows, and then you can go around to the next side. And then when you get to the next side, you're going to do the same type of operation. You start on the top pieces, then the bottom pieces, and then go around to the next side. Say you have 200 feet of hose. Once you finish using 100 feet, you can disconnect it as long as you don't have to go back again. You disconnect it, and then you keep working back towards the truck from that point on, and hopefully you'll be able to have higher water flow at that point. I don't want to have to go all the way around the house doing only the top windows and then start all the way from the beginning. As long as it's dripped down enough, I'll start just on that whole side. I'll do the whole top level first and then go to the next level down. And once I've finished all the glass on one side of the house, I'll go to the next side of the house, because then I know I'm done in the back. Plus, a lot of homeowners, at least around where I'm at, they'll have dogs or pets that they want to let back outside. And so if I'm done with the back first, then I can go ahead and let them know, hey, I'm done back there. You can let your dogs out. They can do whatever they need to do. Let them do their business. And you might need to do a little bit of damage control, some touch-ups. And in those cases, it's a lot better for you to figure out what the problems are. The worst thing that could happen is the customer comes around and says, hey, did you see there's spots on the back there? And then you're going to look bad, and they're not going to trust you as much, which makes it less likely for them to want to rebook in the future, because they'll be like, oh, those poles, they just don't work very good. So that's one of the things to be careful about. Now, every once in a while, you're going to run into things like mud daubers. And that's these little, they build these little clay nests or dirt mess. These, obviously, they get very messy. You want to be really careful with these as far as the rinse goes, because you're going to get a lot of dirt on there. And you're oftentimes going to get some of that dirt onto the brush. And what happens is there could be small pebbles or little pieces of debris that could potentially scratch the glass. So you got to protect your brush, or once you're finished with scrubbing something like this off, you're going to want to make sure to get your brush nice and clean just rinse it off in some water. It doesn't have to be pure water, but you're just going to want to make sure that if any gravel or sand or something that could be sharp gets onto your brush, that you're not putting that back onto the glass and then scrubbing, because then you could cause scratches, and scratches are not good. So I'm just going to finish up here, give it a little bit of a scrub and another rinse. And again, this can be kind of messy, so you want to get as much of that mud off as you can. So I'm just going to disconnect my hose, take it, and generally rinse off this brush. You can see there's some debris in there. And now that the brush is nice and clean, I can get back onto that glass and scrub a dub dub. Every once in a while, you're gonna run into artillery fungus like this. And the water-fed pole cannot get that off. So you're gonna have to actually, you can just use your fingernail and get it. Or sometimes if it's been on there for a long time, you actually gotta get a razor blade in order to get it off. So you just get some soapy water, spray it on there, and use the razor blade. In this case, it's not too bad, so I'm just using my fingernails. And you do what you gotta do. Sometimes you're gonna run into situations where you have those hard water stains. Let's just use the steel wool, scrub it off, and usually that's enough. Other times you might run into more difficult challenges like paint splatters, or if they get a stain or a sealant that they're spraying, it can get little specks all over the glass, and you're gonna have to use a razor blade for that. There's ways to do it with an extension pole if it's high above the ground and you can't get it by hand, but that's another video for another day. This is just going to focus on the more basic elements of water-fed pole, but I usually just do traditional methods when it comes to things like that. There's a few rare situations where you might need to use some type of an extension pole or another way to get it, but typically we're all going to be equipped to get it because we have to do inside windows too, so we'll just leave it at that. When we clean windows with the water-fed pole, you have to be really careful with the bottom edge here. It's kind of stingy. It's a lot of times the stains, especially if this section here sticks out a little bit, it can be difficult to get the bristles to really scrub into the corners and the bottom edge of this piece and the top edge of that piece. Now, before anybody asks, yes, you do usually need to remove the screen first. This house, though, is an exception. I clean their windows every 3 months. I cleaned between the screens and the windows last time, and they're an older couple. They don't like to have to move furniture around. They'd rather not to be bothered with somebody coming inside. So we just kind of made a deal. I give them a little bit of price, and I don't take the screens off. I scrub the screens with the brush, and then I rinse the glass behind it. I flick the screen first and then rinse all the debris off the glass there. And it does like a 90% of the job if there's no major cobwebs or pollen or other major buildup. And when that does happen, they don't really care. They just wait till in the springtime when I come and I clean everything inside and outside. And that's when I'll take the screens out and do a really deep clean with the windows. But all that to say, this section right here, the bottom inch or two of the top pane and the top and bottom inch or two of the bottom pane, that's where I find the most debris can get missed. And so after you scrub the glass, you clean it, make sure there's no residue left behind. Sometimes if it's been kind of entrenched into the glass, you have little calcium deposits starting to form. You can get little white marks that, where this looks milky on the glass. Sometimes you just need to take some steel wool or, one of those scrubbing pads. I think there's a Steve-O scrubbing pad, an IPC. There's a few different ones, but the almond scrubbing pads or steel wool work a fantastic job if there's any debris left behind. And the same thing with these angles. Steel wool or scrubbing pad will usually get that taken care of. You just want to make sure after you clean, you walk away. Sometimes it can look like it's clean while it's wet. So you come back when it's dried off just to double check before you leave, because those places are the ones that will get you in trouble every time. So what you got to do is you got to make sure you dig the brush into it as well as you can, just scrubbing. You go left to right, you go up and down, you can circle around a little bit, but if you get multiple angles, especially on the edges, it'll make a tremendous difference and you'll be doing a lot less going back to re-clean the glass once it's done. You want to have it done once and for all. So you can do a little less of a focus on the interior part, but really scrub hard on the edges. In front entrances, you have to be very careful. Always move the front rug out of the way so it doesn't get wet, as a courtesy for them. And then if they have a wood door or something with varnish on it, you have to be very careful with that because the deionized water can be very aggressive and actually blemish the coating. So if you have wood, you want to be careful. Also, if there's older windows or you want to check around the bottom edge to make sure the water is not going to leak underneath. Just be very mindful of anything that could potentially cause damage or issues down the road. So in this case, no wood, as you can see. It is a brick entry, so that can be slippery. So you're going to want to make sure nobody's needed to come in or out of this door for at least a few minutes for it to start to dry off before somebody would come through. That is something that you would be liable for if somebody was to slip on a puddle that you made without having any type of a non-slip warning. Just something to keep in mind and be extra careful. We're going to start again, top window, let that dry before rinsing the bottom window, and then let that dry before rinsing the door. You're going to work in stages. You can scrub it all right away. While that's drying, you can scrub beneath it, but you're just going to want to wait to rinse it until the layers above it are completely finished dripping. I'll repeat that as many times as I need to if I ever have guys with me, because that's crucial. Otherwise, you clean all the glass, you rinse it all off, and then water drips down from that top piece of glass, picks up dirt and grime from the mortar or from the brick, and then drips right onto the clean glass, and you're going to be having to go back for a spot check. Now remember, when you get in a tight spot like this where it's harder to reach with the pole, just disconnect the top of the brush. And you got a nice little handle to hold on to. You can squeeze in and scrub away. Also, sometimes if the water is not cascading and it's not hydrophilic, it's actually hydrophobic, all the water is beating up, sometimes it's helpful just to disconnect the hose from the brush and rinse with this. That way you get a more condensed water flow, you get a higher volume coming all at once, and so as you rinse down, it's going to be much more effective when the water is not cooperating and it's beating up on that glass. Make sure before you leave, as you're packing up, you keep all of your hoses nice and organized so that they're easy to take out. I know sometimes we could be in a rush, we need to get to the next job, but just make sure, even if you're 10 minutes late, it's crucial that you don't just throw your hoses into the back of your truck or van. You want to make sure that they're put nicely and neatly back into their place. Otherwise, you get to the next location and it's going to take you twice as long just to detangle everything if you would just set them aside nicely. So I put everything in its place where it belongs, and I do one last walk around. I double check for making sure all the spots, there's no spots, rather I do my final spot check, and I'm going to go through and check every section where I worked and make sure I don't leave any tools or anything behind. I put all my doormats back in their place. If they have some type of a rug that I had to roll up or furniture I had to move, I put everything back where it was. And I make sure that the whole area where I was working is nicer and neater than when I first arrived. Okay, that is the basics of water-fed pole. If you have any ideas of things that I might have missed or where I could have been a little more clear or more thorough, go ahead and drop a comment below and I'll try to add that in to another video in the future. Otherwise, you guys, thanks again. Go ahead and like this video, share it with anybody who needs to learn about water fed pole, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next one.